elections and fuel voters' concern.
아이고야. 오늘은 6월 3일인가요? 목요일. 영어 학원을 갔다가 오후 출근을 해야 됩니다. 늦잠 잤어요. 30분 늦잠 자서 지금 시간이 얼마 없습니다. 스트레칭하고 조금 운동하면서 씻고 바로 학원으로 가겠습니다.
November. And what that is really talking about is that actually what you just pointed out, which is that the November election success was in the fact that more people voted than ever before, extraordinary high turnout, and we have to see this spread of misinformation as an effort not just to placate a former candidate or former president, but to suppress the vote in the future, deter people from participating, cause people to lose faith in our democracy and disengage so that people don't turn out in high numbers in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Secretary Hobbs, if this was just, the sour grapes and people wringing their hands and complaining about something that happened in the past, that would be one thing. But now you've got legislatures around the country which are trying to pass laws based on these lies. Observers working on behalf of your office, they've seen, I understand, a number of security flaws, procedural violations happening within this with what's going on in Maricopa County. Can you explain exactly what they're seeing?
Well, there's a long list of concerns that we have posted on our website. You can find it at azsos.gov. It's exhaustive, and I don't have time to get into all of it, but just to sum it up briefly, problems with chain of custody of ballots. Obviously, we told Maricopa County that we think their machines are unusable, again, because we have no idea what they did to the voting equipment that they had possession of. There's been security concerns. They had to pause the audit because of other uses in the building, and everything was stored in a facility that isn't suitable for storage and was swamp cooled, which it has issues with document preservation. So these are just top level, but there's a whole list if you go to our website. And then obviously the very partisan nature of what's being carried out, the folks have a partisan agenda. There's no independence here that would qualify this as any kind of independent audit or anything else.
And just so I'm clear, Secretary Hobbs, I mean, the folks who are running this thing, they can announce anything they want to announce. I mean, they could say, oh, well, we found this and we found X, Y, and Z, and there's no way to validate what they would say. Is that right?
Right. I mean, the lack of procedures that are in place are creating an atmosphere where there's a lot of errors going on and priming it for cooking the books. For exactly what you said. And nobody is going to be able to go back in and replicate what they've done because they've destroyed the chain of custody and the ballots so much that it's not going to be replicatable. So no one can actually refute by trying to replicate the results.
Secretary Benson, do you worry about this coming to Michigan?
Yes, in part because there's been no accountability. There's been no real accountability for the politicians who are connected to January 6th and the tragedy in our U.S. Capitol. There's been no accountability for politicians who continue to spread the big lie. There's been no accountability for organizations like Cyber Ninjas in the Senate in Arizona, the state Senate, that allow them to come in and have access and undermine democracy in such a really pernicious way. And that's why this is going to continue to increase. This is going to continue to escalate. And that's why we have to also keep shining a light on it and tell the truth, because the effort to lie and deceive our citizens about the truth of American democracy is only going to continue, and I think it's going to escalate through 2024.
Yeah, Jocelyn Benson, Katie Hobbs, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Former Congressman and potential Texas gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke joins us to discuss the battle for voting rights in his state of Texas and what Republicans are calling basically a typo that could potentially have depressed African-American turnout. Was it really just a mistake? Ahead.
That's delicious. You have to taste that.
We try to be global and we try to be smart. But I want to hear our authentic voices of people who are passionate, who are intelligent, and that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sunday on CNN.
I'm Ivan Watson in Hong Kong, and this is CNN.
으아.
The saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, fruits of all varieties come with nutritional benefits. Apples are rich in antioxidants and fiber. If you're grabbing one as a snack, don't discard the skin because that contains much of the fiber. As for oranges, they offer more than just vitamin C. They're a good source of potassium and also fiber. And a glass of orange juice can quench your thirst. Just make sure yours has no added sugars. Bananas are a source of potassium and fiber too, and also vitamin B6. Grapes of all colors are chock full of antioxidants and other nutrients. And love your strawberry smoothies? Strawberries are a good source of vitamin C, potassium, and another essential nutrient called manganese. It's a little known mineral that your body needs to stay healthy.
I'm David Culver in Shanghai, China, and this is CNN.
As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, Texas Republicans are quickly walking back a measure in their voting restriction bill. One of the conservative editorial board of the Wall Street Journal had advised they drop, calling it a, quote, political mistake at minimum. The bill's final language would restrict hours for early voting on Sundays when many black churchgoers gather for what's known across the country as Souls to the Polls. Under the bill, polls wouldn't open until 1 p.m. Only now, at least one state lawmaker is saying that that was actually just a mistake, a drafting error, or a typo.
You call it a Scribner's error, whatever you want to. I talked to our team yesterday, kind of regrouping of what happened. That was not intended to be reduced. I think there was call it a mistake if you want to. What should have been 11 was actually printed up as 1.
Perspective now on voting rights in the state and elsewhere from former Texas Congressman and potential gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke. Congressman, first of all, I have to ask you about this alleged typo that I just mentioned, which would have limited black churches' Souls to the Polls events. I mean, do you buy this line?
I don't. The excuse is that, they wrote in the legislation that voting could not begin until 1 p.m. And they said that was a typo. They really meant 11. That might almost be believable if there wasn't the PM that followed the 1 in the legislation. So they clearly meant to eliminate Souls to Polls, which, as we all know, targets black voters in the state of Texas. This was a very conscious, targeted effort to stop some people, including those in the disability community, young voters, black voters, and voters in big cities from being able to fully participate in upcoming elections.
I mean, the bill was thoroughly debated. Not one Republican mentioned the typo during that debate. In fact, one Republican defended the 1 p.m. voting start time, saying election workers want to go to church too.
It's really interesting. This bill has changed over the course of the legislative session, and this provision eliminating souls to polls, as well as another one that's even worse, which would allow Texas to overturn elections based on allegations of fraud. Those were introduced in a 20-page addendum that was given to legislators literally hours before they were asked to vote on this. So this is a bill that went from bad to much worse. And my fear is that even though Texas House Democrats bought us some time by defeating this bill on Sunday, there's going to be a special session called by Governor Abbott, and the next iteration promises to be even worse. The thing is, we've got this window of time. That session probably won't be called until July. If the United States Senate can pass the voting rights bill known as the For the People Act, it would stop these provisions in Texas and Georgia and Florida, in other states that have adopted them, and it would expand access to the polling place for eligible voters. That's the direction our country needs to move in.
When you look at the proposed restrictions beyond what we've already mentioned, that anyone who drives more than 2 non-relatives to the polls would need a signed form stating the reason their passengers required assistance, eliminating drive-through voting, limiting drop-off boxes. I mean, it'd be one thing if there were mounds of evidence over the course of many years that all of these things resulted in widespread voter fraud, but it's just the opposite. All of the evidence, other than the lies coming from, the man in Mar-a-Lago, that are now backed up by most of the GOP in Congress, there is no widespread voter fraud. I mean, I haven't seen anything that drop boxes lead to voter fraud.
It's an interesting argument. When asked, the governor, the Republican legislators who wrote this legislation with the help of the Heritage Action Fund, which has helped to write this legislation all across the country, say, well, we can't cite a specific instance of voter fraud. However, many of our constituents are concerned about it. They're concerned about it because the former president and his co-conspirators have trafficked in this big lie, alleging that there was some kind of widespread fraud in 2020, even though Donald Trump's own Secretary of Homeland Security called the 2020 elections the safest and most secure in the history of this country. So they are akin to the arsonist who wants credit now for putting out the fire that he set. And they're saying they have to come up with these voter fraud bills to stamp out any doubt about elections that they, in fact, created in the first place.
It's one of the things, too, that, a lot of people thought, okay, well, the former president is gone and, that things will kind of return back to normal. But given the way the congressional GOP now has decided to completely buy into the lie and completely continue to slavishly back Trump and cater to his whims, legislation is actually being written and actually being proposed based on complete falsehoods. And that argument which you mentioned, which is our constituents are concerned about this, that just means that after every election, if people just are concerned, then we do